In the rugged heart of ancient Israel, where the promised land's rolling hills bore scars of conquest and betrayal, a nation groaned under the suffocating rule of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram-Naharaim. For 8 relentless years, this Mesopotamian warlord's iron fist crushed the spirit of God's chosen people. The Israelites, once a unified force under Joshua's banner, had squandered their covenant with the Almighty, trading it for the seductive whispers of Canaanite idols, Baal's altars promising power, Asherah's groves offering fertility. Their rebellion was a slap in the face of the God who split the Red Sea, and his response was fierce. He let them fall into the hands of a tyrant whose cruelty knew no bounds. Yet, in the ashes of their despair, a flicker of hope stirred. A warrior named Othniel, son of Kenaz, stood poised to rise, his faith and courage destined to shatter the chains of oppression and ignite a new chapter for Israel. The era was a fractured one, a time when Israel had no king and chaos reigned. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Judges 3:7 notes, a damning verdict on a people unmoored from their divine anchor. They'd claimed the land God promised Abraham, but their victory was short-lived. Seduced by the gods of their neighbors, they built shrines to idols, forsaking the one who led them out of Egypt. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. The text declares, forgetting their God and serving Baals and Asherahs. This wasn't a casual misstep. It was a deliberate plunge into spiritual adultery, a betrayal that burned in God's heart. His anger blazed, and he withdrew his protection, allowing Cushan-Rishathaim's armies to sweep in like a plague. For 8 years, Israel suffered taxes, bled their wealth, fear silenced their prayers. And their children grew up knowing only the lash of oppression. Villages lay in ruin, fields went barren, and hope felt like a cruel mirage. Cushan-Rishathaim, whose name means doubly wicked, ruled with a savagery that matched his title. His empire, rooted in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, was a juggernaut of military might. His soldiers patrolled Israel's towns, enforcing his decrees with blood and terror. The Israelites, stripped of their pride, huddled in the shadows, their cries for mercy rising like a desperate chorus. Judges 3:8 lays it bare. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, so he sold them into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, to whom they were subject for 8 years. 8 years of torment, 8 years of regret, 8 years of wondering if God had turned his back forever. But God's mercy is a river that runs deeper than human failure. As Israel's groans turned to repentance, their hearts softening with the weight of their sin, their prayers pierced the heavens. Judges 3:9 delivers the pivot. When they cried out to the Lord, he raised up a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. Othniel wasn't a gilded hero from a royal bloodline, nor a warlord with legions at his command. He was a son of Judah, a man shaped by a family of unyielding faith. His uncle, Caleb, was a giant in Israel's story, one of 2 spies who, decades earlier, trusted God's promise when 10 others quaked in fear. Caleb's courage won him Hebron, a stronghold in the Promised Land, and his legacy was a beacon for Othniel, raised in Caleb's shadow. Othniel grew up on tales of divine victories, the walls of Jericho crumbling, the Canaanite kings falling. Faith wasn't a theory to him. It was the pulse of his life, forged in the crucible of his family's devotion. Othniel's first claim to fame came before his judgeship. In a daring feat that etched his name into Israel's saga, the city of Debirker, or Kiriath-Sefer, stood as a Canaanite fortress, its high walls a defiant challenge to Israel's dominion. Caleb, now a seasoned warrior with fire in his eyes, issued a bold offer. Whoever attacks and captures Kiriath-Sefer, marry my daughter Aksa. Judges 1:12. Othniel, young but burning with ambition, answered the call. This wasn't just about winning a bride, was it? It was about proving he could lead, fight, and trust God's strength with cunning and valor. He led a band of warriors against Debir's defenses, scaling its walls and routing its defenders. Judges 1:13 records the triumph. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and Caleb gave him his daughter Aksa in marriage. The victory was a milestone, but the union with Aksa was a partnership of faith. Aksa, cut from the same cloth as her father, wasn't content with a barren inheritance. She urged Othniel to ask Caleb for land, then boldly approached her father herself, demanding, "Give me a blessing. You've given me land in the Negev. Now give me springs of water." Caleb granted her the upper and lower springs, a gift that mirrored the couple's shared thirst for God's provision. Judges 14:15. Debir's conquest marked Othniel as a warrior to watch, but his true test lay ahead. Cushan-Rishathaim's oppression had gutted Israel's spirit. The people, mired in their idolatry, were a fractured remnant. Their faith eroded by years of chasing false gods. Could one man rally them? Othniel wasn't a king draped in splendor or a priest wielding sacred authority. He was God's instrument, chosen for a divine appointment. Judges 3:10 sets the stage. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. That Spirit was no mere inspiration. It was a torrent of divine power, igniting Othniel's resolve and sharpening his purpose. He was no longer just Caleb's nephew. He was Israel's deliverer, called to face an empire. The mission was staggering. Cushan-Rishathaim's forces were a colossus, their ranks swollen with seasoned soldiers, their strategies honed by years of conquest. Israel's army, by contrast, was a patchwork of farmers and shepherds, their morale crushed by 8 years of subjugation. Othniel faced not only a physical foe, but a spiritual battle. The lingering curse of Israel's sin, a darkness that mocked their covenant. Yet, he stood unshaken, his faith, rooted in Caleb's legacy and tempered by Debir's triumph, was his greatest weapon. He'd witnessed God's hand in the past. Now, he staked everything on God's promises. The war began in the heart of Aram-Naharaim, Cushan-Rishathaim's domain, where the Tigris and Euphrates fed a kingdom of unrelenting power. Othniel gathered Israel's warriors, his presence a spark in their weary eyes. He didn't promise easy victory. He called them to trust the God who never fails. The battle erupted with a ferocity that shook the earth. Swords clashed, shields splintered, and the air grew thick with dust and blood. Aram's forces were a tidal wave, their numbers and discipline threatening to drown Israel's hope. Othniel, at the forefront, felt the weight of the fight, his men faltering under the enemy's relentless assault. The odds were brutal, the outcome uncertain. Doubt crept in like a shadow, whispering that freedom was a fool's dream. But Othniel didn't fight alone. Judges 3:10 delivers the turning point. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Areka, into Othniel's hands, who overpowered him. The Spirit of God surged, a divine fire that turned the tide. In a moment that felt like the heavens tore open, Aram's army staggered. Their commanders fumbled, their lines buckled, and panic seeped into their ranks. Othniel seized the moment, his voice a thunderous rallying cry that echoed across the battlefield. Israel's warriors, infused with divine courage, charged with the ferocity that defied their ragtag origins. With one final, earth-shaking push, they shattered Aram's defenses. Cushan-Rishathaim, the doubly wicked king, was captured, his empire's hold on Israel broken. The land exhaled, free at last, the yoke of tyranny cast into the dust. The victory was seismic. Judges 3:11 declares, the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel son of Kenaz died. As Israel's first judge, Othniel ruled with a steady hand, his wisdom a beacon for a nation rebuilding its soul. Fields bloomed, villages rose from ruin, and faith flickered back to life. He wasn't a flamboyant hero, craving glory or gold. His strength lay in his surrender to God. His leadership, a testament to obedience over ambition. His marriage to Asa bore sons Hathath and Meshgonothai, the latter fathering Ophrah, 1 Chronicles 4:13, whose lineage carried Judah's warrior spirit forward. Yet, peace was a fragile gift. Othniel's 40 years brought stability, but Israel's heart was restless. As he grew old, the siren call of Canaanite idols, Baal's might, Asherah's allure began to seduce the people again. When Othniel died, the nation's fidelity wavered. The cycle of sin, poised to restart, Judges doesn't flinch from the truth. Israel's faithfulness often died with their deliverer. But Othniel's story isn't just about one man's triumph. It's about a God whose mercy never quits. Even as Israel drifted, God stood ready to raise another judge, another chance for redemption. Othniel's legacy is a flame that refuses to die. As Israel's first judge, he set the polling, faith over fear, trust over tactics, God's power over human might. His defeat of Cushan-Rishathaim wasn't just a military coup. It was a spiritual victory, a rebuke to idolatry, and a reminder that no enemy can stand when God fights for his people. From De Beer's conquest to 40 years of peace, Othniel lived not for himself, but for the God who called him. His story speaks to anyone who's felt broken, trapped in a cycle of failure or despair. Israel's 8 years of suffering mirror our own dark seasons, when prayer seemed to vanish, when hope feels like a lie. Othniel's rise proves that God chooses the unlikely, a warrior from a small tribe, a man with no crown, only faith. His victory shouts that God's spirit can break any chain, and his life challenges us to cling to faith, to reject idols, and to trust that deliverance is always closer than we think.